Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh. Wow. See, yeah. Anyway, trickling over from yesterday. Sorry I wasn't on yesterday. I have a day job and it was kicking my butt. It was super late finishing up with work with the day job, so I was not able to do any streaming after that because I was really late. um, so there's that. I'd like to apologize for that. Um, some of you who like to go into my past broadcasts may notice that I have a lot of video that has bad audio and video sync, and I tried so hard to fix it. I sat over the weekend to try and redo some of them, and you're just gonna have to catch them on another channel because I'm gonna have to do um, I have to do actual recordings of it with just straight up recording. Um, so there's that. That is another thing. You'll also notice that one of the episodes is entirely missing from the feed altogether, and that's because it doesn't follow community guidelines to the best of my knowledge. It's kind of a gray area where I was at, but I didn't want to chance it because this is a great community. I really like being able to stream what I'm reading, but at the same time, as everyone else, everyone deserves to have a place where they feel safe and everything like that. And I would never want anyone to not feel that way. Um, I'm also a strong believer in community guidelines are there for a reason, so I intend to follow them to the best of my ability. If there's anything that becomes an issue, let me know so I can fix it, because that's what I want to do. I want to be able to have something that people can enjoy. Um, Having said that, why was that video taken down? Like I said, it didn't follow community guidelines. I'm going to talk about what the video was so that people have a frame of reference for when they're watching these later. Basically, one of the main characters, Allison, she is attacked by one of the villagers. Um, nothing is graphically described, but there was an attack. She is basically ostracized by the family because she is attacked, and she ends up killing the attacker. And the family of the attacker wants to seek vengeance on her, which brings us to that. Which brings us to the most recent chapter. Um, there were some other things that happened where basically the wizards of the city were still trying to, and they aren't really wizards, they're basically what's left of the House of Pengua, are trying to pick up what they can, and they're trying to rebuild. Meanwhile, Royan, he is trying to find, he discovers that there was an ascension gift, which he determined was Allison, basically so that Allison could go before the king and present, or wait, could go before the Grandmaster. The Grandmaster would create this plant from another world in order to be this grandiose ascension gift for the Emperor. So, without further ado, I'm now going to bring into Chapter 5. I've also taken to reading the chapter before I start. I'm going to do my best to. There's some things that kind of allude to what happened earlier. They don't go directly, but I'm going to talk around it just because I don't want to lead into anything that could be construed as against community guidelines. So, without further ado, I have Chapter 5. It looked like any other village of the new land, but Royan was not navigating solely according to the direction and distance from Gagapeng. His spells of finding had already told him that this village was where the woman was. The woman Tangrel had brought, the cause of all the trouble. No, be fair, Royan. It was Tangrel who was the cause of the trouble. The woman was a victim, same as all the rest. But she might be a means of undoing some of the trouble. The smells reminded him that villages, particularly villages here in the new lands, did not have the advantages of waste disposal plants that Gagapeng had. There seemed to be a crowd around one of the houses. What could that be all about? Probably a village meeting called to discuss some local problem. A more important question to Royan's mind was where should he land? Pretty well every stretch of cleared land was planted to something. He'd get better to reception if he didn't crush their crops. Aha! There was a small patch where some runty-looking Deja were grazing. The herd boys, more intent on what was going on in the crowd around that cabin than what their charges might be doing. By now, he had sufficient experience with the balloon that he could break it down with something close to precision. The Deja, half wild that they were, noticed his arrival first, and scattered away from underneath him. The herd boys, armed only with sticks, fled as well, but they fled toward the crowd of adults. Landing the balloon required slacking off on the spells that held the thing up, and gradually strengthening the spells that attracted it to the ground. The final steps of the procedure took up much of his concentration, that he was only able to pay attention to his surroundings once the basket had bumped down onto the ground, and the bag, half deflated, wobbled above him in the wind. He looked up and saw that most of the villagers had left the gathering around the cabin and were advancing on him. At least half of them were holding spears. He held up his hands. I come in peace. For a moment he thought they were going to ignore his declarations of peace and put a spear through him for his troubles. Then an older man, carrying a staff instead of a spear, spoke. You come in peace? Yet you drop from the sky like a bird of prey, scattering our Deja? Strange way to come in peace. I apologize. I came down in the middle of the Deja to avoid crushing your crops. I will make restitution. One of the ones with spears, whose anger Royan suspected had some cause other than scattered Deja, spoke. What will you do for restitution, city wizard? Cast some flashy spell to impress the dumb yokels, then fly away back into the sky? I wouldn't do something as cheap as that, declared Royan, abandoning his notion of doing just that. I have something here that will last longer than any spell I might cast. He bent down into the basket and carefully brought up an iron axe head. Despite his slow and deliberate motions, the big man's spearhead was in his face as he straightened. No weapons, friend. See, I bring up my hand slowly. Only an iron axe head. Nothing strange, nothing magical. I offer this as a gift. I will be willing to pay some agreed-on restitution in such goods to make up for scattering of the Deja. The older man spoke sharply to the spearman. Soranea, don't allow the spirit of murder to slaughter any guest that comes to Strix Bolg. Royan caught from what he had arrived at the 10th time in the village. That he had arrived at a 10th time in the village. Did slaughter any guest mean what he feared? Then someone flung open the door of the cabin around which the people congregated, and a woman stepped out. No, it wasn't the woman he was seeking, but when she spoke to him. Good! The city wizard comes to repair the mess he made. What sort of foolery were you up to in the city then? It took him by surprise, but he recovered quickly. Not my doing, lady. I'm only the one picked to come undo the damage, so much as possible. Let them think he was some underling, not the person presently in position of the one who'd caused the trouble. She was not mollified. You have no idea of the trouble that has come to this village, have you? If your fancy wizard's trick had not gone awry, she never would have come here. She looked around at the spear-carrying men, and she seemed to have as little good to say to them as to him. No, you fools, I do not say that you should point your weapons at him instead of her. I say that you should let him take her off to the wizard city to get her out of our midst. She seemed to be hinting that whatever the city wizards did to her, it would make up for whatever she'd done here. He was about to protest that he had no intention of harming her, when the woman looked straight at him again, and seemed to shake her head slightly, a gesture of negation, as though she knew what he was going to say. He said nothing. Her speech seemed to change the attitude of the crowd a trifle. They did not trust him, did not like him, but they were willing to deal with him. The woman, the local wise woman it seemed, came up to the basket to take a look at him. Get back, all of you! I want to talk to the city wizard in private. The people moved back, not very far, but far enough that she could be sure of being unheard as she said in a low voice, Can you return her to her home? He considered lying, only momentarily, then said, No, the one who brought her killed himself in doing so. Worse, he killed or rendered incapable anyone in Gagapeng who might have been able to do so. The wise woman's face showed a moment of stark anger, but she went on in a calm voice. You mean no harm to her? None. Best you don't, city wizard. He wondered again for an instant what she might really be capable of doing, and then she was speaking again. Old Kangasa will dicker with you for the damages. Don't let him have the coat off your back and your shoes as well, but be as generous as you can without seeming a total idiot. She moved off and spoke a quick sentence to the man with the staff, who approached him. This matter of scattering the Daisha, it is a serious affair. In his mind, Royan sighed. It looked to be a long session. Indeed it was. After an extended, wearing time, discussing various matters, from the difficulty of rounding up the scattered Daisha to the representative value of iron in the city and in the new lands, they came to an agreement. They decided that Royan should give over 5 axe heads and 3 hoe heads, for which the villagers would accept that restitution was done, and toss in 2 small skins of wine and some dried fruit. He had originally hoped to buy more food here. In Strick's bolg. Who was Strick and what was a bolg? But this is not time for that. He'd have to land at some other village on the way back, and just try not to scatter their Daisha. At last the wise woman went to her door, and softly called what seemed to be a name. A woman came out, the woman Royan had seen so often in his searches. There was a murmuring around among the crowd, and Royan caught the repeated term. Corner girl. For some it was said in anger, for some it seemed just curious. Climbing into the basket, in that once fashionable dress, required her to show a good deal of her legs. Royan looked away, but the picture still stuck in his mind. When he looked back at her again, she was giving him the eye. You plan to get us out of here? He'd been facing down royal messengers and high-ranking members of wizardly houses for weeks, but this woman managed to fluster him. He responded, Yes, lady, at once. He cut off the spells holding them down and increased the spells, putting hot air into the balloon and lifting it. The balloon jerked up into the air. Royan set course for home. So you've rescued me. I hope you don't have any illusions about me throwing myself into your arms over it. He gave her a look. Not at all. I don't know what I rescued you from, except that you got yourself into some trouble back there. Listen, what happened back there was that was that I was sound asleep and that man attacked me. I killed him. Unfortunately, his family thought they needed revenge. You came along just as they were trying to work up their courage to storm Morlai's cabin and haul me out. Oh, given her obvious state of mind, it didn't seem safe to say much else. Her anger was still up. She went on to speak about the attack. Hold on, I have to trying to word this carefully. He was a little annoyed at himself, particularly because he hadn't been thinking about her in any sort of light. You've made your point, pushed it home, and nailed it firmly into place. I only ask that you make note of the fact that this basket is very small, and we're going to touch by accident from time to time. Please be assured that it's only accident on my part, and do refrain from killing me, if only because I'm the one controlling this apparatus and keeping us from spreading our innards all over the landscape. Allison tried hard to be civil, though she had many things on her mind. She didn't think she had deserved any blame for the way things had come out in Strick's bulk. Despite all Morlai's efforts to get her out safely, she still harbored some resentment towards the village. Furthermore, she was in enforced close quarters with a man she didn't know. A man who just pointed out that without him she couldn't keep this little balloon in the air, let alone move it anywhere. No, the whole business was not conducive to a good mood. Worse, the fellow had only said what he'd said in reaction to her snappishness. My name's Allison, she said, and was instantly annoyed by the truculent tone of her voice. Your pardon? He turned from where he'd been staring intently at the forest in front of them. I said my name's Allison. I expect if we're going to be together for any amount of time, we ought to get acquainted. Oh, yes, indeed, he smiled, very warmly considering their previous exchange. I am Royan, Gridion's child. As I told your hostesses, I am trying to put to rights some of the damage done by my late predecessor. You can send me back? She saw his face, and the flare of hope died. I'm sorry, my predecessor died in the process of bringing you over, and the effect of his spell killed or incapacitated nearly every other wizard of equal capability. So just what exactly were you intending to do to put things right? She wasn't sure just what the change in his expression meant. Guilt? Why? Let me ask you a question, Allison. Have you any idea why Tangrel brought you here? No, why? This time she was sure she saw disappointment in his face. I'm sorry, part of the problem is I don't know myself. He never told anyone, and he kept his exact reasoning to himself. I have a general notion he brought you here as part of a particular purpose. That is, I know generally what he was working toward, but I have no idea where you fit. What did you do back in your world? Perhaps he chose you for your abilities. I'm a botanist. What can you want from me here? All the plants here, with one or two exceptions, are plants I've never seen. I wonder then, his voice trailed off. You wonder what? The snap was back in her voice. He refocused his eyes on her. This is only a guess, mind you, based on what little I know of the man. I suspect he brought you over to get information about plant life in your world, so he could produce a plant for the Ascension Day gift. You're only confusing me. Produce a plant? Ascension Day gift? Oh, sorry, was there no one in the village that did plant magic? Oh, that. Yes, more like killed weeds, helped plants grow, and things like that. He nodded. I see. Well, in Gagapeng, we have more powerful wizards. Much of our work is in adjusting plants to perform better, or to produce previously unknown products. So what I see in general is that Tangrel had intended you to have you describe some plant or plants from your world. Then he, starting from some plant in our world, would produce whatever you described for the king. The king. Yes, our household has been the wizardly household for the King of Rosthan for ages. As such, it is our duty to supply a gift for the anniversary of the ascension of the king. The king prefers a gift that can demonstrate the power he commands. Therefore, it has to be something striking. Strikingly useless? His face went serious. Allison, up here in the air, in this balloon with me alone, such things are nearly safe to say. Don't even hint that you think them on the ground, in the city, even to me, since someone possibly may be listening. Surely you don't speak so frankly of your own king. Allison gave an instant's consideration to the standard lecture of the benefits of democracy over inherited kingship, but held herself back. Given the sort of things she just said, he'd probably be incapable of understanding the concept. No. He nodded. I'm going to land at that village there. He pointed at a haze of smoke rising above the forest. We need a few things for the trip, and Strixbold was not the place to hang around and dicker. Roya managed to land without scattering the Deja this time, nor flattening any crops. On the other hand, the villagers were frightened by the visitation, and their fright came out in annoyance, just short of hostility. They were not so much on the edge as the people of Strixbold, though, and no one seemed to threaten him with a spear when he reached for one of his iron axe heads. When they saw the ironware he had available, they took out their annoyance by hard bargaining. A tall fellow, slender as a grain stalk, did the bargaining for the village. Iron is a fine and useful thing, he agreed. But at this time of year, with the crops barely started, food is very important, and any mouthful sold now may mean hunger, perhaps starvation later on in the year. Of course, I am a mere wizard knowing nothing of these matters, save most of my life's work is with plants of one kind or another. Do you think I know nothing about all the growing seasons and what will or will not be available? Your flahas here will be ripening in another week or so. Even if you had all you had to live on, if that were all you had to live on, it would last you for a few weeks until the alum were ripe. Fine, fine. A city wizard knows all the vagaries of farming, based on his city experience, where 9/10 of what he grows is grown under magic that keeps the worst of the weather from affecting them. I tell you, though, I have farmed here for 15 years, and it is no small risk to sell so much food at this time, no matter how fine your iron tools are. Ryan recognized this all as bargaining tactics, meant to raise the price of the food. Not wanting to use up all of store trade goods in one place, just in case an emergency should come up later in their trip, he cast about for something he might do to hold on to a little more of his iron. An opportunity wasn't hard to find. He pointed to a large erratic boulder in the middle of one of their fields. Would it be worth anything for me to move that rock out of the field? You're that strong, city wizard? That's exactly my point. I'm a wizard. I believe I can move that thing out of your fields, giving you that much more room for crops. What do you say to that? The long, lean man frowned. And what will it cost us? Suppose I only ask a payment equal to what you've already given me. Agreed, then. The village spokesman still appeared to doubt that Royan could do what he promised. Royan nodded. Good, then. Make me a small fire here. Shortly there was a small fire burning. By this time, the crowd had drifted away during the bargaining had returned, drawn by the promised sight of a real wizard working. Royan took one of the loaves of bread they had already bought, broke it apart, and tossed it in the fire. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. Food was not so plentiful that they could afford to burn a loaf of bread. Royan spoke a few phrases and pointed at the rock. A soft red glow settled over the rock and then turned green. Slowly but determinedly, the rock lifted free of the soil, clods of earth dropping free as it moved up. Royan turned slightly, pointing toward the edge of the forest. Ponderously, the boulder floated in that direction, settling finally with a crackle as it crushed the underbrush. The glow faded. There was an excited chatter of voices. The headman turned to Royan. So, you did as you said, but on the other hand, you used up some of our firewood doing it. I think that would be half the agreed on value right there. Royan raised his eyebrows. Very costly firewood you have here. I'll allow you 1/10 part of the value. A quarter. 1/5. Any more than that, and I will return the stone to its place. Just as a hint of what sort of thing you might be fooling around with here, he thought to himself. The headman showed no sort of fear, though. The headman showed no sort of fear, though Royan suspected he was more impressed than he let on. They came away from the village with sufficient food and drink for the rest of the journey, as well as 2 warm Dacia hide robes for when they went higher. A little while later, with Allison's questioning eyes on him, he tossed out a loaf of bread for the spell to recharge the ebony box. What was that about? He was a little surprised that a non-wizard would ask about magic. In his experience, mostly they tried to ignore it, for fear something nasty would happen to them. For their part, wizards did little to discourage this attitude, partly so as not to be bothered with foolish questions, and partly, he had to admit, to bolster their reputations. But she had asked, so he answered. I was casting a spell to replenish the magic that keeps us up and moving. By tossing out a loaf of bread? She obviously knew nothing about magic. Any use of magic at all requires some sort of sacrifice, if only a drop of pure blood. The larger the sacrifice, the more power available. Oh, she sounded surprised, almost shocked. Magic works differently on your world? Magic? We don't have any magic, just technology. So do we. It has its limitations, though. So that business with the rock back there, was that really magic? Not just some kind of technology I don't understand? Yes, it was magic, of course. She's looking pale now. There's no of course about it for me. You can do anything with this magic? Not hardly. You can't make a plant from nothing, for instance. And contrary to the stories you might hear, magic can't allow you to force anyone into doing anything they don't want. He didn't bother to mention that his society had produced a number of plants which could be distilled, boiled, and powdered, or whatever, to give much that effect. There are a whole list of things we can't do, and another long list of things that are forbidden. I see. He wasn't altogether sure she did see. They continued their flight in silence for some time. The caravan master looked at Malungtol up, and down. Well, you don't look like a bandit. He was a broad and muscular sort, showing hair on arms. Showing hair on arms, legs, and chest wherever his clothing didn't cover him. He was also suspicious of everyone and everything. You a suspect? No. Nobody's told me that officially yet, he thought to himself. You seem uncommonly anxious to get on the road. You're sure you're not a suspect? Of course I would, Now how in the world could I prove that? By not casting spells? You wouldn't be afraid to go to the local watchers detachment and have them declare you not a suspect. Of course I would, and so would any sane person. They get their name on their list, they go to work proving that a person is suspect, and if you had any sense, you wouldn't suggest that. What do you think would happen if I went to the local watchers and said, Caravan Master Curbtull wants an affidavit swearing that I'm no suspect? Then they'd have your name on their list too. You want that? No, never mind, forget it. I'll save my money for some caravan master who isn't such a fuss budget. Gerptel waved a hand. Just a minute, don't be so hasty. I'm sure we can make an agreement. You can't blame a man for being careful, can you? Not in these times. Melunctil smiled. He could have gone on to verbally beat the man over the head for excessive caution, but he had what he wanted, and no sense utterly ruining any relations he might have with the caravan master. No, I suppose not. A man has to be careful. What sort of terms do you offer? It took another few minutes to agree on a fee and what that fee would include. At the end, when the agreement was made, Gerptel lifted a monetary finger. When we get into bandit country, I take precautions. Anyone acting suspicious at that time is dealt with rigorously. Anyone attached to the caravan, no matter how much they've paid, is under my rule and law. My decision has no appeal. Will you live with that? Oh, yes, I'll live with that. I just want to get to Goral on the Sarad. Hedjolini frowned at the message. All indications were that at least some of the reported detections of Melunctil were false. For one thing, new reports had him appearing at 2 places in the country, at distances he couldn't have covered in the time between reports. Now, too, Captain Yanoma had reported that careful questioning revealed no traces of Melunctil passing through one of the other places. There was a possibility that Slider, Freya's liver, had developed and provided a means of disguising a person's magical essence, as well as their physical features. That should be looked into. He jotted a note to have their own magicians investigate the possibility of such a thing, and how to counter it. Will there be any reply to Captain Yanoma, sir? Hedjolini considered the matter. Yes. Have him go directly to Goral on the Sarad. If the suspect is fleeing to Rothsand, most routes go through there. The man waited a moment, in case there were anything further, then answered, Yes, sir. Hedjolini sat back for a bit, thinking of the impossibility of stamping out magic, of the necessity of magic itself to control the misuse of magic. As the case of Melunctil demonstrated, magic was a nasty, subtle thing, eventually corrupting even those who started out with the best of motives. Yet he could not, dare not, make that declaration to anyone in authority, to anyone, really. It would result in people of any ability at all avoiding working for the kingdom, knowing at some point they would necessarily be declared a suspect. Royan brought the balloon down to a landing in the courtyard of the Pengwa household. It was full daylight. His landing would cause a great deal of talk. But the amount of spell juggling needed to bring the thing down in darkness to a precise point was so close to the edge of its capability that he preferred not to risk it. Even so, a mob of goggling servants, junior students, and children gathered at pretty much the exact spot where he intended to land. He came down anyway, muttering to himself, If they have at least the sense of a Deja, they'll move. If they don't have that much sense, they don't belong in Pengwa House in any capacity. He knew with a fair degree of certainty that his fellow masters were watching from somewhere where the crowds couldn't see their consternation. He considered momentarily offering the king a balloon ride as an Ascension Day gift. But no, that was too dangerous. Further, he'd have to make the balloon able to accommodate a whole company of royal guards, plus, like as not, several of the King Chief's hangers-on. As matters turned out, everyone did have sense enough to get out from under the balloon. The one doddering old retainer was pulled away at almost the last minute. Here, Royan called to some of the servants. I'm going to collapse the bag over on that side. Catch it and fold it neatly. He gave orders for the others to unhook the basket. Got a couple of the baby wizards to take charge of storing the ebony box. By this time, various upper servants and persons with some sort of authority began to take control of the crowd, moving off to whatever duties had been interrupted by the sudden return of the Grand Master. Allison took one of the hide robes and used it to get herself out of the basket without flashing too much leg. Allison, Ryan said, would you please come with me? My 2 fellow masters will be waiting in ambush for me inside. Best to get all the interactions and explanations over and done with. The other 2 were not waiting just inside. They were making a point of their relative unflappability, Ryan supposed. They did a good job of that too, coming casually down the stairs to meet Ryan and Allison going up. So you finally gotten back, Ormond said. Farrell hung back a step and was silent. Yes, I'm back, and I brought with me Allison McHarg, the person Tangrel killed himself to bring over. Oh, really? Ormond eyed her. Was she worth the trouble? Worth the trouble Tangrel caused? I don't think anyone or anything could be worth that. Worth going out to Strick's Bolg to pick up? I'd say yes. Who's Strick? What's a Bolg? Ormond shook his head. No, never mind. Like as not, even the villagers themselves would need half an hour to explain it. As for her bringing Worth it, you'd have to say that, wouldn't you? Ryan merely smiled. Yes, I would. In this case, it's true, if only because she gave me reason to test that balloon. I think we have something there, though we may need to do some tweaking on it here and there. Something to do what? Scare cattle and farmers? Think about it, Ormond. This is a prototype. We can make bigger ones, sell them or rent them to merchants to take their goods from this place to that in nearly a straight line, without regard to the way the roads lie or rivers run. Huh. Well, I suppose that is one thing. But you were off after the Ascension Day gift. She's it? Ryan shook his head. No, not as such. Best guess I can come up with is that Tangrel had intended her to describe some plant or plants from her world. Then he'd reproduce the plant for the king, with special attention to how he'd come by it. This sounds a bit ad hoc, but who knows what Tangrel is thinking. I don't think Tangrel is thinking at all something to do something that big without shields. Well, I don't think we want to fight that one all over again on the stairs. And I should give you a chance to get cleaned up again before I tell you all the news. You'll have to show up to meet with a deputation any time now to demand what Pengwa House is turning loose on them this time. Ryan grinned. Nice of you to allow me time to clean up. Get a hold of the servant, will you, and have Allison escorted to the guest quarters. I think she'll want a bath as well. Any private baths here? Ryan looked at Allison. Private? Yes and no. The city's communal baths and the household baths are for socializing as well as bathing. For just cleaning up without the gossip, a person can have a bath in their room, except for the servants, of course. They use the household baths at set times. A private bath is what I want. No more corner girl for me. Corner girl? Never mind, just show me to my room. Just a moment. Ryan quelled his annoyance. She'd spent a long time in the farming village where there are no servants. He called to one of the servants who were always within call. Dolamang, I need a bath in my quarters, and the lady here needs a bath in the guest quarters. Please see to that she gets to her quarters, and arrange for the baths. Yes, Ryan, sir. Ryan turned back to Allison. Allison, be careful who you ask for anything, directions or the like. In this household, we have servants who see to most things. You can distinguish them by the yellow sash. And of course, any teenager, even if they're not a servant, should have the courtesy to help you to ask for what you need. She seemed a little annoyed, but that was unfortunate. She had to know polite manners here. It might even be that she was annoyed with herself for having made the gaffe. He turned to head off to his room. I'll just walk along with you, Ryan. There's a couple of things I've done that you should know about. Sounds ominous, Ormond. only if you think that I've stepped on your authority with what I've done. I've been making inquiries in the marketplace for magicians to join us. Not the illusionists and sleight of hand artists, of course, but people who actually have some ability. Ryan frowned. That's something I ought to have thought of. All the more so, considering I was adopted into the house myself. Did you have any luck? Fourth, I think will be worth the trouble. You're the Grandmaster. You're the Grandmaster, though. You have the final say. Roy nodded. Fine, I'll trust your judgment in the matter. Go ahead and make the offer, and track down anyone else you think will do well in the household. Just let me know about anyone you're thinking about making an offer for. Royan took as leisurely a bath as he dared, expecting all the time to have a servant interrupting him apologetically to let him know that a royal messenger was at the door, with half the army behind him, demanding explanations. The expected interruption came just as he had actually reached the state where he was feeling regretfully that he should have to leave the bath in its comfort. Royan, sir, the king's messenger is at the gate, with soldiers. Thank you, Dave Alma. Tell them I'll be down presently. After that he hurried. It was one thing to display dignity and high rank by keeping people waiting. It was another thing to inflame the king, who was doubtless already upset. The king's messenger was, of course, upset. I apologize for the delay. Royan started off by admitting a fault and hoping to placate the man at least a little. I had just come from a long trip and was cleaning myself up. I thought it best not to greet you as filthy as a street beggar. I see. The man did not appear to be noticeably placated. Grandmaster, there have been more strange things happening in your household grounds. The king is concerned as to what these may portend, and what dangers will arise from them. Royan nodded. Given recent events, the king might well be concerned. You may assure him that this was but the test of a new technique, one that required little magic and was well shielded. I see. I know little of magic, though, and cannot find your reassurances reassuring. In that case, there is little point in trying to explain the relative lack of danger. Suppose I say instead that this is a test of means of flight, and a means of flight that may be made available to all. Roston's merchants could have a great advantage, being able to fly their wares from here to, for instance, Lunchmakor, in the space of a week rather than several weeks. And Pengwa House will make considerable money from all this, of course. The messenger smiled tightly. Royan shrugged. The method of it was a discovery of Pengwa household. Certainly we would profit, but the kingdom would profit as well. Of course, there is one other matter which has been put off for far too long. We demand that you open Pengwa House to our inspection, now, today, so that we can be assured that you have indeed suffered as badly as any household in this disruption caused by your late great master. Certainly. You and the king's representatives may come in and investigate as much as you wish. We will not allow wizards of other houses to poke and pry around to find our secrets. Nonsense! If we have no wizards to explain to us what we might be seeing, we might as well trust the inspection to a troop of blind men. They will come in. If it's the king's will and desire, I can only bow to it. We do so under the most grievous protest, however. Protest all you wish. The king has desired it to be done, and it will be done. So be it. I will accompany you, of course, as you wish. And so that again, that's another chapter for tonight. Yeah. Again, sorry there were some parts there where I had to actually kind of talk around a bit. I'm going to be trying to get a little bit more smooth about that as we go, but practice makes perfect, I suppose. In the meantime, though, I will wrap it up for tonight, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow night. So take care. Thank you for tuning in.